we are honestly facing some battles in front of us that would be funny if they were not so serious. The level of comedy that we're facing, and I use that word tongue in cheek, but the level of absurdity that we're facing, particularly around COVID-19, now has us at the place where we are facing a new variant that, according to some estimates, could be hundreds of times more contagious than the Delta variant. This is a direct result of policy decisions. It's a direct result of the politicization of COVID-19. It's a direct result of the mishandling of the last administration, but as well as this administration. There are too many people who are still dying in the midst of this pandemic, but it's directly connected to the absurdity of our timeline. The world that we're living in right now is so ridiculous that we have a huge portion of this country's political elite who are pushing us down the road of sheer destruction. Not only in the sense of hawking ivermectin and horse dewormer or hydroxychloroquine or all of the conspiracy theories, but even the underlying principle of why poor nations around this globe are unable to get access to the vaccine because of the patent. We are now faced with the Omicron variant of COVID-19, not just because of the political absurdity of this moment, but also because of the greed, because the manufacturers, they have to keep that patent so that they can keep making their profits. And now we're dealing with a variant that is hundreds of times estimated more contagious than the Delta variant. And we are still in the backdrop of half of this country's political elite not only playing around with COVID-19, but literally doing things to make things worse. I want us to take a listen to Dr. Fauci as he discusses the transmissibility of this new Omicron variant.
It has the molecular characteristics that would strongly suggest that it would be more transmissible. It has a bunch of mutations, a disturbingly large number of mutations in the spike protein, which is the business end of the virus, which really binds, particularly in one particular component of that spike that binds to the receptors in your body, in your nose, in your nasopharynx, and in your lung. The mutations would strongly suggest that it would be more transmissible and that it might evade some of the protection of monoclonal antibodies and convalescent plasma and perhaps even antibodies that are induced by vaccine. When you diminish or stop or block travel from a particular country, there's a reason for that. It's to give you time to do things. So don't let this decision that was made about blocking the travel from certain countries go without a positive effect. And the positive effect is to get us better prepared, to rev up on the vaccination, to be really ready for something that may not actually be a big deal, but we want to make sure that we're prepared for the worst. If people follow the recommendations of the CDC and all of us about what to do in traveling, in getting vaccinated, in getting boosted, we could have a situation where you do continue to veer towards getting to some degree of normality. It's within our own capability to do that. And that's the thing. We've got to put aside all of these things that are getting in the way of good public health practices. This is not rocket science. We know exactly what we can do.
It is not rocket science. I do have to say here, though, that the nations that this administration, the Biden administration, decided to block, as far as the most recent update that I have, do not include all of the nations where the Omicron variant has been found. But it does specifically block travel from African nations, particularly South Africa. There's a problem with that, because if the intention is to stop that variant from getting here to the United States, there are European nations that you need to stop travel to right now, Joe Biden, like right now, today. Don't give people this false sense of security because you're doing a travel ban on these African nations, because the variant was discovered by South African scientists. But I digress. We'll get to that part later on in today's episode. We'll be speaking more about that with Rebecca Azor and James Bubba Williams, DJ Exclusive, during the 9 o'clock Like It or Not hour. I want to go more specifically, though, to this report from Reuters, the discovery of 2 imported cases of a new and possibly vaccine-resistant variant, the Omicron variant in Hong Kong, suggests that the new variant is likely already in international circulation. This is according to Dr. Ben Cowling, an epidemiologist at the University of Hong Kong, and this is a report from Reuters. Let's take a listen in.
The chances are that this virus has traveled to many other parts of the world, and maybe those other places haven't yet realized it or haven't yet recognized it. In Hong Kong, we're doing a lot more testing in travelers. Because of the additional concern about this new variant, it's quite possible that some governments will start to restrict travel from South Africa, maybe other parts of Africa. But I think we have to recognize that most likely this virus is already in other places. And so if we shut the door now, it's going to be probably too late. One of the things that we've noticed in the last maybe 18 months, 2 years, is that travel restrictions can be introduced very quickly, but it's more difficult to see them relaxed again. So I'm a little bit concerned that we may see some countries put on a red list or even a black list. But then when this new variant appears in other parts of the world, and in theory that there's no particularly high risk from South Africa or other African countries, we won't see them taken off the black list or taken off the red list as quickly as they were put on that list. And that's a concern now, almost 2 years into this pandemic.
He's speaking directly to that underlying issue, right? The underlying issue of putting all the emphasis on African nations when, in fact, this variant has been discovered in other nations. There's a discrepancy there that is going to continue to cause this pandemic to be exacerbated. That's the thing. Like, if we're serious about putting an end to this pandemic, then we would not be concerned about the political ramifications of calling for a vaccine mandate and calling for mask mandates and shutting down this country. We're almost 3 years into this pandemic, and it's as if we just began. That's because of the absurdity of this moment, and that's because of the political intransigence and the unwillingness, more and more importantly, the unwillingness to take the necessary political hits to save lives. That's what we're dealing with. COVID-19 did not have to be as bad as it was. At this rate, we will have 1 million Americans dead from COVID-19. Not because we didn't have the science, not because we didn't have the technology, not because we didn't have the capacity to shut this thing down. We did not have the political will to do so. In fact, Donald Trump's will was something totally different. He, along with Republicans, are a death cult doing everything they can. Check Ron DeSantis in Florida. Check Brian Kemp in Georgia. Check Reeves over in Mississippi. These Bible Belt Republicans are doing, or these I-10 corridor belt Republicans are doing everything they can to get as many people killed by this pandemic as evidenced by their policies and the outcomes of their policies. But it's not just them. The Biden administration is culpable for all of the deaths that took place underneath his leadership. And if we're not serious enough to shut this thing down, do not give the people a false sense of security by vilifying more black people, Joe Biden.